pleasure of having Kathleen Lewis from Board of Public Utilities. So she has been working on this issue, and she knows the clean energy program much better than anybody. She's the outreach person at Clean Energy and Board of Public Utilities, so she works on that front. And she has been very, very active in terms of, she came from the public office side, and then she went to the public agency, so she was mayor, and she was a very, very active mayor in a way, like when I read and when I knew about what you are doing. So she comes from Lawrence Township Council member, then became a mayor, then leader in transportation options, and she's very interesting in terms of the inquisitiveness has always been there. So some of the people like who go from public service back to the agencies are always an asset. So thank you, Kathleen. Then we have Barbara Blumenthal, Bob, so from New Jersey Conservation Foundation. I have a pleasure of knowing her for some time. We have discussed, we have talked about her. So she's a research director at New Jersey Conservation Foundation. And she has a unique perspective. I'll say, like, she has worked on energy resources and works on not at just the state level, but knows the state pretty well in terms of these policies, modeling aspects, and others. So again, thank you, Barbara, for coming here. Then we also wanted Anthony Bevacqua, who wears two hats in a way. Like, he's part of CESAC, but he's also a full-time staff at DEP. So Bob, we have that collaboration as well, where Montclair State University CESAC, as well as the full-time staff in the Energy and Sustainability Division. So Anthony is working on the community solar aspect. He is a PhD candidate. Most probably he'll be defending soon, so he'll be fully with you rather than with us as well. So hopefully. So his work is like community solar analysis that in the morning session, Commissioner Chivukula talked about, and others that we have worked with, Board of Public Utilities, that stepped into that what we can do at CESAC apart from that, beyond that. And where Anthony came in, like his research took a slightly different shape when we got that work. So we said, okay, we have done this, but can you do it further beyond what we were expected to do? So he'll be talking about his research that he has been doing at CESAC as part of his doctoral work. So Anthony, and the last of all, like Eric, who is always like, we need clean water action because we talk about, oh, research is good, we know the policies, state agencies and others, but what about who work with the communities, who come from the communities, who interact with communities? So Eric is the campaign director of Clean Water Action. He brings unique perspective in terms of interacting and also being, in a way, I'll say, politically active. And in a way, politically active, that means he works for the environmental and energy causes. And when Climate Week or others are talking about climate strike, he talks about like why it should happen now. I hope you will bring some of those perspectives into this session. So give a hand to all of the panelists, and we look forward to a very good discussion on this front.
Good afternoon. Okay, it's at the end of the day, but you had coffee. Try that one more time. Good afternoon. There we go. I know it's getting to the end of the day, but we just had coffee and some sugar, so we should be a little bit better, at least for another hour. So yes, I'm here with the BPU. At this point, you guys probably you've already heard a lot about us, and you've heard from multiple members, but, where did I go? So all of our clean energy programs are paid for by ratepayer dollars, so we are very mindful of the fact that what we want to do with those dollars is we want to put the money that ratepayers pay back into the system so that we are actually saving energy. So at the end of the day, their dollars are actually going to reduce their costs overall. And we do that in a variety of ways. Ooh, that's a very quick button. We have a large portfolio of programs. You've heard about our renewable energy side today. We have our distributed energy resources. I don't think we really talked about microgrids and storage and those pieces, but that is another piece of our clean energy program. Our energy efficiency, which I'm going to talk a lot more about, and our C&I and our residential programs, which are a really great way to get those ratepayer dollars right back into the system and saving energy for those ratepayers. All right. But really, you guys all want to hear about community solar because it is brand new here in New Jersey. It is not new everywhere, but it is a great program that is really looking to make community solar accessible to everyone. For those who are unfamiliar with community solar at this point, it is a generally larger, it has to be at least for 10 users. Remotely located solar facility, so it is a grid, solar field someplace. It could be on a rooftop, it could be on a parking lot, it could be in a field. There's lots of options that is then being used to virtually create energy for subscribers. And the idea really is to make solar energy and renewable energy accessible to those who it could not be accessible for before. So who's going to use solar energy? Who's going to use community solar? First and foremost, do you have solar, or do you want solar but you don't have a place for those panels? Oftentimes that's a renter. I live in an apartment. I'm committed to renewable energy, but I don't have any way to access it because I'd have to convince my landlord. And how am I going to convince my landlord to invest in something for 30 years when I sign a 1-year lease? Conversely, you could be like me, who lives someplace where I have lots of trees. And my options are I can cut down all my trees or I can go solar. Those don't seem like good options. So someone like me may invest in community solar. It is particularly valuable for low-income communities if we can do this correctly, because it provides them with an option to get renewable and hopefully discounted energy and to lower those bills, the same way it's lowered other people's bills who have that solar. The other side of this, because there are really two sides to community solar, is do you have room for more panels but you didn't need the energy when you put your panels out? And this is for someplace like Montclair is a perfect example. You've got some great solar facilities, but you also have lots of extra rooftop. You have lots more parking lots. But right now, they're capped because they can only generate as much energy as they can utilize. Places that have additional space for those solar panels may want to become hosts to our community solar program so that they can start generating that energy back into the grid and subscribers can utilize it. So really, what we're looking to do is build solar facilities that put that energy back into the grid. That goes out to those subscribers who are then utilizing renewable energy that they no longer had access to. And so when we talk about it, people are a little bit skeptical sometimes and also a little bit confused because there's a lot of different places. Are you telling me that I should buy into community solar? Well, yes. Are you telling me that I should put some community solar on my building? Also maybe yes. And so there's a lot of different options here. So for folks, the first piece is a subscriber. I need renewable energy. I want renewable energy. I don't have the ability to put it, or maybe I don't want to put it. My house isn't sited properly. I rent. I have too many trees. I lease my business and I would like to go renewable, but my landlord won't let me. Those are all potential subscribers. Also, I just don't feel like having the hassle of how am I going to deal with these solar panels. Also a subscriber. The developer, that's going to be your solar companies. Who's going to develop this array? Most of the time they are partnering with a host site. That host site could be someplace like Montclair. It could be a manufacturing plant, lots of rooftop there. It could be a municipality or a county. It could be anyone other than farmland, essentially, who has the space and the proper siting and has found a developer. Now, I will say this. If you are a developer, you have to find those subscribers. And so that piece may be an obstacle for some folks, but that's one of those pieces. The utility is obviously going to be involved, and then you have the installer. So there's lots of options when we're looking at how we're getting involved in community solar. When we look at it, one of the other pieces may be, as you're looking at community solar, do I want to be a host site? Well, I actually need some of that power. An anchor subscriber could also be the host, or it could just be somebody who takes up to 40% of that solar that community solar array is generating. For affordable housing, this is a great opportunity. For affordable housing that is being built now, thinking about how you can put solar on your property is going to be important. For affordable housing that is out there currently, if you have an affordable housing property and you can convince those folks to be part of the subscribership, that is also great. There is a requirement with our community solar program that at least 40% of this first year's pilot go to LMI households. So really we're looking at opportunities to subscribe folks as also as host sites. For those subscribers, you can either own, basically buy a share or a portion, this panel is mine, or you can buy a subscription. I'm going to subscribe for $40 a month and get X amount of energy. That is going to be credited to your electric bill every month, and then you will pay the difference or see the savings. So community solar is a key part to how we're moving renewables in there, but the other piece is, how do we get communities to buy into all of the other pieces of this programming? And how do we get communities to buy into and participate in all of the goals of the Energy Master Plan? And that's where we created a community energy planning grant. The goal of that grant is to have communities, whether it's a town, a county, multiple towns banding together, those communities to look at the Energy Master Plan goals and find strategies to move towards those goals within those communities. And that is energy use. So it could be how are we going to be more energy efficient in our government buildings? It could be how do we identify businesses that could be more energy efficient and move them towards that? It could be the same thing for residential. A place that is near and dear to my heart is transportation planning. How do we plan it so that we are prepared for electric vehicles? And then here's the funny thing. I want to encourage you to use electric vehicles, and then I want to encourage you to leave them at home, because I don't want you using them as much, because then we're not using all that electricity. And how can we make more multimodal communities? And how do I get you to use a community EV instead of just using your 2 cars in your garage, so I can get you down to 1? Land use. Where should we be putting these solar panels? Where should we be building, and how should we be building? Can we move towards greener code? Water management. Water management is not just for the water piece. It is actually on the energy side as well. If I can reduce the amount of runoff that is going into the sewers, I reduce the energy that sewage plant needs to use to clean that water. How do we do these pieces? Waste management. How do we move to having less garbage so that I have less trucks that have to go, producing less carbon in our air? How do we make all of those pieces work together? The community energy plans are intended to have communities look at it from a much larger view and an integrated view for how we can get there together. And that really helps get to all of those Energy Master Plan goals on a local level. And part of that is applying all of the other BPU programs that we have once you've ascertained where those goals come from. So, it really did go quickly, sorry. So what we look at is, where can you use all of our incentive programs? If you have identified a company that could really lower their energy use, how can we get them into our programs? Is it by using our direct install program, where we pay 70 to 80% of the cost of replacing that refrigerator or that HVAC unit up front? Is it with some of our more expansive programs where we actually look at how you build a greener building from the ground up, or how you do a total renovation that is much greener? And identifying those programs and putting them to use. Part of that, I apologize. I must have a very firm grip on this. Benchmarking is going to be a huge piece of this, particularly for commercial properties, because we need to know how much energy you're using before we determine how much you can save. Right now, the BPU provides benchmarking as a free service. Also, by 2024, all commercial properties over 25,000 square feet must have an energy and water benchmarking report completed. So this is a great opportunity to get that work done through the BPU, and to get it done early. And when we do those benchmarking reports, we'll talk to you about all those incentive programs that will help you save that energy that we've just identified. See? We are moving to a much simplified version of our incentives. If you go to our website, which is njcleanenergy.com, you will find programs with many different names. Over the coming months, one of the things we're doing to make these more accessible for all our communities is we're streamlining that process so that it's a much simpler process for folks to walk through. We do the same thing on the residential side. So, if you are looking for simple things, I need to replace my HVAC. Well, guess what? We have an incentive program for you to do that with a more energy efficient one, and we'll give you money for that. Could be as simple as, I'm going to be replacing my refrigerator. There's money there too. Getting folks to look at this, and part of the community energy planning grant is getting communities to understand the impact that those little changes can have, and making them understand that there are incentives that we can put out there and programs we can do to have everybody moving towards that clean energy future. Because if we talk about it up here, it's not ever going to get done. We need to make sure that residents and companies and everyone understands not only why the programs are in place, but how they can access them. So I promised I would be brief, so we'd have lots of time for discussion. So I will leave this slide up for a moment while we move over.
Thank you. Barbara Bromanton.
Good afternoon. Okay. I'm going to just make a few simple points because I would love to have this conversation. The first point is if you look on the right-hand side, that's the result. I'm assuming we're talking primarily about LMI, low moderate income communities today. When you get your electric bill, there's a few factors that influence whether you can pay your bill. Kathleen just pointed to a whole bunch of programs that BPU have to help people, including bill assistance, and I don't think you mentioned that. No, okay. So that's one solution. When your energy bills are high, there's some help that's available to you. The most important thing is preventing it from getting high, so the energy efficiency programs are hugely important, tightening the building envelope, having more efficient equipment. The problem is that, even when we start to really grow and expand those programs, they get to a fairly small percentage of the population every year. And so what do you do with the other 90% of the people? If their bills are going up and they don't have the energy efficiency investments that year, they've got a problem. So I think the bigger issue, the one place that we frequently don't talk about to have an impact on whether energy is affordable is what is it that determines whether rates go up or down? So let's talk about that. So energy, we always talk about, well, the problem isn't rates, the problem is bills. That's why energy efficiency is a good thing. But if you're not one of the ones that got energy efficiency and you don't have a tight envelope and you don't have efficient equipment, you have a problem with your rates and your bills. So if rates go up, we have a problem. And so that comes down to a fundamental, I think, insight that we're getting through the work that you heard about in the last session and the one before that. The modeling that's going on, this integrated energy planning process that the state is doing, really trying to get line of sight. How do we get to 2050? What are the resource mix? How is it going to change over time? How do we reduce gas usage for the electric grid over time to reduce emissions? And most importantly, it's solving for least cost. What's the lowest cost pathway to get to those emissions goals? And what we know from other states, other regions that have done this, is that if you're smart about your policy, you can identify pathways that are lower cost than continuing, even assuming that natural gas prices remain low for the foreseeable future. So even with low-cost natural gas playing a huge part of the current business as usual case, we can save money by shifting to a combination of renewable resources and flexibility, clean, flexible resources. That can replace gas. So that's exciting, and that's really what I want to talk about. The ways to get there, these modeling studies are really interesting, but they don't make it happen. So they just point the way, and you get to choose what are the near-term steps to be on as many potential pathways as possible. That's the other thing. You're not really trying to pick winners. You're not trying to guess what's going to happen by 2040. You're just getting that line of sight and then saying, what is it that we can do in the next 3 to 5 years that keeps us on multiple viable pathways? It's a least regrets sort of strategy. So we want to be taking steps that we're not betting on any one view of the future. we're taking steps that allow as many possible ways to get to zero emissions as possible, or low emissions. So it depends. These modeling studies show you what's the least cost mix. And it's not just buy a bunch of this and buy a bunch of that. It's very specific about the quantities and types of solar, offshore wind, onshore wind, building electrification, EV, aggregate EV charging, demand response. It makes a lot of assumptions about how we're going to get that flexibility as well as the resources, and it will be, if you choose a different pathway and sort of ignore the modeling results and just do whatever feels good, yeah, you can have a lot of clean energy, and it might be a very high-cost pathway. That's the risk. So I think what determines electric rates is going to be the right pursuing policies that put us on one of those pathways that actually is a smart mix of the resources. And some of them are going to be high-cost resources. It doesn't mean that you don't make investments in some things like offshore wind that are currently higher cost. That's fine. It's just part of the mix. And what puts us on a high-cost pathway is if we just set arbitrary targets for a resource, if we if you make investments in the distribution grid to, quote, modernize it that don't have any value, as many, many states in this country have done in the last 5 or 6 years. If you spend money on transmission that doesn't get you to where you need to be. So there's many things that we could spend money on that are not all that helpful, that make rates go up. And there's some smart things we could be doing that will actually keep rates low. So that's the point. If I wanted to know how to make energy affordable, that's what my suggestion would be. And the rub is that we have to think about policy in a very different way going forward. And can New Jersey have new approaches to policy based on analysis, more rigorous, thoughtful processes about the mix of resources, or are we going to continue current policy approaches? And if we continue current policy approaches, my fear is always it's about your rates and your bills, but it's about losing public support for what we're trying to accomplish here. If we can get there and stay on a low-cost pathway, we will continue to build public support. People will see emissions come down, and they will see their electric bills not go up, and we will be able to maintain strong public support for climate policy. And if we don't do that, we really run the risk of losing public support. And I'm going to end with my little story about Indiana. So just to tell you how real, I know it kind of like it's disconcerting. Really? Are we going to have lower cost clean energy? Is that even possible? I know it doesn't, I find very few people in New Jersey that actually believe that can happen. So I need you to all to go out and tell all of your friends this story. In Indiana, which a little tiny piece of Indiana sits within PJM, in Indiana this last year, there's 2 regulated utilities. It was time for their annual planning, or their planning process, their IRP process. So one of them went to the marketplace and said, you know, we've got 5 coal plants that are uneconomic. They're not doing well. Now this is a regulated state, so what the equivalent of the Board of Public Utilities gets to make these decisions. So the first utility needed to replace their coal plants and did an RFP to see what's the least cost way that we could possibly replace all of that generation coming from 5 coal plants. And they were shocked that 70% of the bids that came in that they chose were solar and wind. 70% of replacing the generation from these 5 coal plants, they're now procuring from solar and wind in a state that has no climate policy. They don't care about emissions. They have no mandate to do any of that. Why did they do it? Because it saved $5 billion for their ratepayers. So that was last year. The first utility came forward and had this insight, and the PUC, their Public Utilities Commission, approved it. They said, this is great. We're going to save a lot of money for ratepayers, not because of climate policy, not because of an energy master plan, not because of a global warming response act, just because it costs less money. This year, recently, a few months ago, a second utility came forward and said, we're going to close four coal plants and replace it with a huge combined cycle natural gas plant. And the PUC said, no, why don't you go back and look at renewables? We hear they're less expensive. This is in the state of Indiana. So this is real. And they're part of the same grid. We can get energy from the same places and pay for solar and wind at sort of at the same scale that they are. But anyway, it's real. Low costs are coming if we're smart about it. Thank you.
Oh, I'll go and then go back. Eric, do you want to go? Your slides are up? Okay. Here we are. That's me. Hi, everyone. Thanks for sticking around. I really appreciate the opportunity to share some of my work with you. I'll be talking about increasing solar access through policy innovations and spatial analysis. The solar we'll be talking about is solar photovoltaics, polycrystalline and monocrystalline silicon wafers inside a PV module arranged inside in an array and then integrated into our energy systems. The siting and design characteristics in PV now include a lot of site-specific information that requires lots of in-field measurements that are very costly, time-consuming, and can be hazardous to those taking the measurements at times. Let's see. We covered the solar regulations nicely today, so that saves me a bit of time, so thank you to my colleagues who presented. The main solar markets that we have currently in New Jersey are residential grid supply and large net metering. You can see the trends over time that we have. There's been peaks and falls across the various markets, and we can anticipate changes in these rates going forward as policies change and systems are retired and replaced with new systems. We can go through this. So the barriers to adoption are rooted in cost, but also available space, grid connectivity, land conservation, and of course, available technology. Just want to get to it. Okay. So, and also I just want to note that solar access is not easily accessible to all, especially those, as we discussed earlier, whether it be financial reasons or property ownership. And also, even just things as simple as shadings. Okay, so come-in community solar, which removes a lot of these barriers and opens up a lot more opportunity through virtual net metering on the EDC level. So the real research question that we're asking is, how can we divest from fossil fuel electric generation and maximize environmental benefits while serving environmental justice communities and conserve valuable landscapes? To do this, we use a series of analyses, including economic analyses, demographic analyses, and what I'll be talking about today is spatial analyses. And in that, we'll be able to identify prime locations, identify where systems can go, where they're likely to be located, and also estimating their generation. So there's a few different types of spatial analyses that you can do to answer these questions. The first being a large-scale single variable analysis. An example of this would be the solar siting analysis through the NJDP. It's really helpful to do a quick analysis on a statewide level, but it is a bit coarse. Then you could get into more specifics, such as proximity analyses, where you have suitable areas, such as parking lots, and part of the policy that you're trying to accomplish, such as serving low to moderate income communities. Then we can get into, is the system likely to be installed at a given location? Through this, we look to electric distribution territory hosting capacity. Although hosting capacity values are not the single determination of if an array is likely to be installed, it can have significant influences on the cost of the array due to equipment upgrades at the feeders. To apply this data across other data sets, we use an inverse distance weighted interpolation method, which allows us to take hosting capacity points and then estimate a surface that then can be overlaid and intersected with other layers, other data sets. We then classify these data sets into low, medium, and high ranges of their PV capacity. In doing so, we're able to look at various features within each electric distribution company territory and identify where the suitable locations are and how many of those are in higher capacity areas. For example, residential building footprints, non-residential impervious surfaces, and parking areas. Then we can look into multi-variable community solar suitability analysis. This is a raster analysis approach which lets us take into several input data sets and apply a weighted matrix based on the community solar pilot rules, the regulations and scoring criteria. In doing so, we can incorporate land use, land cover, environmental justice, and LMI communities, building footprints, county zoning, landfill areas, preserved and agricultural development area farmland, and flood zones. Again, the IDW. And now that you have areas that are suitable, you can then look in more detailed resolution of how much you can anticipate a system to generate. So a quick note, the current traditional methods of estimating solar radiation are direct normal radiation, so that's not taking into account changes at the surface, and it's quite a coarse resolution. It's great for estimating, but there's additional ways to do that. For that, we look to remote sensing and LiDAR, which is a light detection and ranging, which allows us to create digital 3D models of landscapes and features on those landscapes. The result of a LiDAR is an XYZ point cloud, so this is millions of tiny features, points making up this surface. And through that, we can gain real useful information in the design and siting of potential systems, as well as feed information to policy development. For example, we can create digital terrain models, digital surface models, and from these we can deduce building footprint areas and anticipate where these are in different zones to identify potential residential and non-residential areas, for example. Additionally, we can calculate the roof vectors from these digital 3D models. So now not only are we identifying building footprints, but we can actually identify the roof planes of systems. So here's an example of the digital surface model with the various roof planes overlaid on top. From this, you can identify slope, azimuth, and estimate the potential radiation. As a former residential solar system designer, this information would take quite a long time and could be costly in software and man hours to get this information for one site. With this available technology we have now, we can identify this potential over entire neighborhoods remotely without having to go out into the field. And finally, we can actually calculate the solar radiation analysis for these different roof planes, allowing us to not only identify where locations may be best, but how much energy generation we may see there. To conclude, the history of solar in New Jersey has been a real fruitful one where we've seen lots of expansion in the past and a positive future going now. But there is definitely a need to reduce some of these costs associated with establishing these systems, not only with the design, but the available technology. And I think once these information is more widely available and you can see time and money saved, you're going to be able to reduce the overall cost of solar and then making it more accessible to more people, especially with the community solar policies, where you're just really opening up the door to let a lot more people participate in this and avoid the emissions in the electric generation sector. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the tried and true that made it this long. Appreciate this. My name is Eric Benson. I work with Clean Water Action. My job title is a little vague, campaign director, but that means I'm a professional climate activist. So I think I'm bringing a different perspective or a different voice to some of the things, the data, the science, and other things, the policies that we've heard discussed today. So Clean Water Action is a national organization. We work on statewide campaigns. It's where we can focus on opportunities. In New Jersey, we have offshore wind is a big opportunity. Our Pennsylvania chapter can actually work on stopping fracking gas. All together, we're working on stopping climate change together. In 2017, our organization did support Governor Murphy's campaign. That was based on his climate and other commitments. Since his election, we've been a little bit critical of his inaction on climate to date. He can legitimately say he's been doing better than the last guy. It's a low bar to set. And since his election, there's been reports that have been released, like the IPCC's. They've come out saying the climate crisis is worse than we thought, and we have less time to act. So Clean Water Action and others have formed a coalition, a campaign, Empower New Jersey. It's Clean Water Action, Sierra Club, Food and Water Watch, Delaware Riverkeeper, Environment New Jersey. So there's a couple of big statewide environmental players. We're supported by 90 local groups throughout the state. We're calling on Governor Murphy to impose a moratorium on all new fossil fuel projects. There's currently 15 different projects proposed throughout the state. It's pipelines, compressor stations, power plants. Each one of these projects stands in direct contradiction to the governor's 100% renewable energy by 2050 goal. So when you're in a climate crisis, when you're in a hole, step number one is stop digging. So that's one of our main calls for the Empower New Jersey campaign. And then we ask them, do today, what you can do today. So there's a number of tools, we need every tool available to us to help avert climate catastrophe. So we're looking at, the state has had the authority to regulate carbon pollutants, carbon dioxide, methane, black carbon since 2006. They just have to write the rules. State can update their ozone trading policies. It'll help clean air, reduce the burden of pollution shifted to low-income neighborhoods. The Clean Energy Act did provide community solar and energy efficiency programs, but at the same time impose a cap on solar programs. Start mandating rapid reductions of pollution in environmental justice communities that have long been polluted. And then also, we're saying, tell the fossil fuel industry that if they're building, it's at their own risk. So when we talk about affordability and low income, if you build a pipeline now, they say we're going to make money back over the course of 50 years. But if the science says, if our new policies that come out say we're going to turn off the pipeline in 10 years from now, who's going to pay for the costs? And so keeping it down for the ratepayer, make sure that people that are, companies that are building fossil fuel infrastructure know that they're doing it at their own risk. So this is some big picture stuff. Why is this important, and what does it have to do with making clean energy affordable and accessible? It does come down to the cost of inaction is too often not calculated, it's not considered, or it's overlooked. The modeling, we've talked a lot about it today, the state is currently doing about the Integrated Energy Master Plan doesn't include some of these costs as they search for the lowest cost model solutions. So there's some direct monetary costs, storm damage, there was $71.3 billion for storm damage for Superstorm Sandy that's between New York and New Jersey. I don't know when the next storm is coming or how much it's going to cost, but the science is telling us it's not going to be good. So we're currently paying healthcare costs, and people are paying this price right now, and it's disproportionately felt in low-income neighborhoods. We're going to come back to this again, stranded assets, build it now, and who's going to be paying for it later. Natural resources damages, when you're actually extracting fossil fuels, and then also looking at the carbon life cycle, the full beginning to end. We are destroying local resources to extract it. There's leakage of methane, which is a much worse climate pollutant all along the way, and even at the end, of the transmission, there's still emissions that have health impacts and climate impacts when we burn them. So just when we're considering the costs, let's make sure that everyone's on the level playing field. So as we discussed over the day, New Jersey has all the right reasons to be a global leader on clean energy. Let's start thinking about inaction as costs and clean energy as opportunity for investment. It will save you costs over time, and it's clear that you get more back than what you put in. There are investment dollars available if you have some vision, some leadership, and a commitment to securing them. This is just a list of a couple of ideas. But if you think beyond just ratepayers, you can generate a larger pool that's going to be more equitably distributed. Restore the sales tax, New Jersey estate tax, and millionaires tax, all sunset under Governor Christie. And then this current legislature did pass a bailout bill. It enabled the BPU to award PSE&G nukes $300 million in ratepayer subsidies, even though there was two independent authorities, the Ratepayer Council and the PGM rate auditor found that PSE&G did not qualify or need the subsidies. So just adding the conservative ends of those together, I call it a cool $1.8 billion a year. Just think about what kind of investment can you get for clean energy, make it in an equitable way, and move us forward quickly. I put in here, it's $11 billion that the state's awarded in corporate financial subsidies. They're under a lot of scrutiny right now. You read about them in the news. This just shows that when there's a will, there's a political will, there's a way. So there's dollars are there. We just need the powers to be to get them. So once you have the vision, the commitment, and the dollars, there's a lot of ways to make sure that you're spending them in a more equitable solution and that you're supporting low-income communities. So here's a couple of quick ideas here. So the community solar program is a big step in that right direction, and they're actually mandated. 40% of that is supposed to go towards low and moderate income families. So I think there was some missed opportunity here to be a matchmaker. When someone wakes up in Patterson or Camden or Newark, they don't wake up and say, you know what I need today? Community solar. So I think there's opportunities for the experts who know a lot. What are the ideal sites that we'd like to place these that are going to, maybe the largest areas that we can get the most bang for our buck. Who owns that? Who's a willing, property owner with the solar builders? Get the best price and then do a little bit more outreach in these targeted communities. You got to meet people where they're at, in their churches, at their schools. We could certainly do a more robust program. Otherwise, people are going to continue to get left out of opportunities like this. Electrifying New Jersey transit is another early investment we should be making. These buses are driving through local communities that run on diesel fumes, so they have a direct negative impact on local communities. New Jersey Transit is one of the farthest behind in electrifying its fleet, so it would have an immediate impact on low-income neighborhoods and get us off some fossil fuels. Electrifying the port, that's another, Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. The port in Newark and Elizabeth is one of the largest in the nation, second or third, depending on the month. But it's a huge economic driver for the region, but it's also one of the major contributors to pollution, asthma, and cardiac issues in the local respiratory issues in local neighborhoods. So electrifying these port operations, we have a lot of opportunity because Port Newark particularly, we have a lot of people in this area. So the goods and cargo that's coming into Port Newark, it doesn't travel far. This is not the stuff that's going across the country. We're consuming it right here. So this is an area you can electrify the ports, electrify the trucks. They just have to get to exit 7A on the New Jersey Turnpike and back up to the Parkway. So that's definitely something that you can electrify. Again, it would have a direct, quick, and a more equitable solution in low-income neighborhoods right away. And then just one last part, we're talking about energy efficiency programs. They're great, but to make sure that low-income families are included is you can't do retrofits of an old house that's full of lead paint. I mean, it increases the cost. You're trying to secure the envelope, but you're also creating a lead hazard at the same way. So to make sure that families have the opportunities to save on their energy costs, reduce their need, tie some lead remediation programs to energy efficiency programs. So we can get there. I think the students last week demonstrated a lot of leadership, a lot of political will, and a lot of political power. We just need more people, to be pushing. So thanks for the time today.
Thank you, Eric. So you heard the diversity in the panel, starting from the state, also talking about research, and then going to the activist one. So I'm sure you have questions, campaigns, or anything that comes up. This is the last session, so please ask questions, otherwise you will miss out for the year. Any questions? Otherwise, I have set of questions. I can go along my laundry list. So the first question that I have is both of you in a way, Bob and others, like also, like there is a idea of rent control. Can something be thought about in terms of rate control energy when you talk about that? In terms of that, the charges cannot go beyond something. That can be another way to look at the subsidy that the state or others, what Eric was talking about. Can you think about something, or rather than when we say rent-controlled apartment, can we think about the rate control and how it can impact equity?
So I think for low-income families that there is bill assistance, so that it can't be more than a certain percentage of your budget. I think that's what it's based on.
Yes.
Yeah. So that is a form of, like, we're going to put a ceiling there, and we'll help you so that it'll never cost more than that, so that it already exists. And I guess I prefer to think about how can we do this in a way that rates are going to come down and bills are going to come down. And so that's where I'm sort of, I think we should be shifting our attention, not to how are we going to help people when the rates go through the roof or the bills are way too high. How do we prevent that from happening? And there's many different strategies for how we can keep costs down.
Yeah, but think about whenever any new subsidy comes up, ratepayers are on the hook. So that idea can be how to take ratepayers off the hook or something, so that incentives has to be in the industry. Like one side we talk about that, oh yes, they are becoming cheaper, but then why ratepayers on the hook if clean energy options are becoming cheaper?
So I think that there's a couple of pieces there. One is if you do qualify for certain assistance programs, there is that ceiling. Two, when you look at, particularly for the LMI community, in other places where they've had community solar, they've created incentives to get folks into the market. I think that we talk a lot about energy efficiency because part of this, part of what we need to do to move towards that clean energy economy is not just create new renewable sources of energy, it's to use less energy. And so putting a cap on how much your bill can be, no matter how much energy you use, doesn't get us there. So I think that that's part of that equation. But what we need to look at is, quite frankly, as I'm sitting here and listening, is how do we get to Indiana? I mean, that's really what we're all looking at when we look at all of these incentives for solar and where we've gone. It's how do we get to a point where people go, oh, solar is affordable. And so I think that that's where we need to get to. As opposed to putting an arbitrary ceiling because you want to make sure that use is coming down at the same time.
Thank you. Ms. Eric, do you want to chime in on that? Or?
I said my piece.
Okay. So the question to Eric, your part will be like, when you argue for the clean energy option, and one side that we talk about is decarbonization. And when you say, okay, invest or take it or leave it approach, don't do anything or go for measured control, means your option is, okay, ratepayers will be on the hook for the longer term, but we are on the hook right now. If we don't go that way, we might go into the ditch rather than going through the slope. So how do you counter that argument that when modelers or others, they talk about, they say small wins are also a win rather than all-out win?
I mean, the businesses, people have talked about this today, they have to think about, what's going to happen in 10 or 20 years. Businesses are making big decisions over long periods of time. It's just, we have, the lights are on, we have pipelines in the ground. I mean, we're already on the hook, as you said. But moving forward, we certainly can say, there's 15 projects that are under consideration right now. And investors, if they have the right information, we might be able to work through regulatory features, but investors will make different decisions based on having information that they know is going to be something that's there for a long time. So if you tell them they're on the hook, they may not, consider continuing to build it. And I think that's a good consideration.
Thank you. I think, Bob, go on.
I just wanted to agree with Eric on that. I think one of the most important things that Governor Murphy has done by having the Clean Energy Act, executive orders, and now the Energy Master Plan is he's sending some pretty powerful market signals out there about what the future is going to look like in New Jersey. And even before we get around to what are all the implementing regulations, it'll take us a couple of years to figure out. If I were an investor, I would hesitate to build a new gas plant in New Jersey. So, or to go ahead, if there's a project that, anyway, we can talk about specific pipelines, but I would be hesitant if there's something about state policy that would impact that in the future. So I think that's already happening, that kind of market signal.
So Comfort Partners is a great program funded by the Clean Energy Program that is specific to the LMI community. There's obviously always new ways that you can advertise and market and do those pieces. But I would say, too, that part of what we're trying to do with the Energy Master Plan, if you look at the draft, one of the strategies is all about how to address that LMI community, as well as just the communities in and of themselves. And so part of that is really moving towards community endorsement of programs like that to get them in there, because it's one of those places where I think that folks, you get one of two problems. One is people don't know about the program, and the second is people are wary of the program. And I'll add a third, which is I don't want to take charity, because we do see that oftentimes when one of our Comfort Partners professionals goes in and they go, no, I'll pay for it. I'm not taking charity. I don't want it for free. It's not often, but we do see it. And so I think that one of the things that I'm hopeful for is, as we look at this community-based, how do we convince the whole community that we're in it together and we all need to do this together, that the idea of doing these audits and having folks come in and do these things is not going to seem odd. So it's not, so if somebody qualifies for Comfort Partners and they find it off-putting because someone's going to say, well, why is somebody coming in there and giving it to you for free? Well, your neighbors probably just got a free audit as well. They might not get all of the pieces for free, but they did, and that makes it less awkward for you to talk about. I also think one of the programs that we're looking at launching later this year is our multifamily program. And our multifamily program is, rather than being resident specific, it's building specific, and it allows for landlords to do a lot of those energy efficiency upgrades with incentives to them. So taking it from both sides. So now Comfort Partners is really resident specific. Do you as a resident qualify? Do you hit 250% of the poverty level? Well, there are going to be people in that same building that are at 251% of the poverty level and can't get it. That doesn't mean that they can afford it. It just means they can't get it. So if we can incentivize those landlords to do those investments as well through those programs, that is going to help all of them. And in addition, when you're doing it from a landlord perspective and a building perspective as opposed to a unit perspective, you can do a whole lot more of that envelope piece and all of those other things that get to the large energy efficiencies.
And following up on that, oh, you have a question? Oh, means community solar is a good program, but why not other programs follow that model in LMI and integrating that into, rather than just having community solar as a success, other clean energy program, can you put LMI communities also in, like some level 40, 30 or?
So I think that many of our incentive programs do actually have LMI pieces to them. Comfort Partners does. There are additional pieces, some of the added incentives that we've created in this fiscal year specifically target those places. If you have a building, whether it's a business or a residence or a municipality building or a school that is in a UEZ or an opportunity zone, you get additional incentives. So we are finding ways to target those areas because that helps. And I think that we are going to continue, as I said, the Energy Master Plan really is, we have, I think, 7 strategies. Of those 7, one of them is focused on how we integrate this into the community and how we address the low and moderate income folks. So I think that is a real focus, and it really is about making sure that these programs are accessible to everyone.
Thank you. Prakash?
Yeah, the community solar program is a wonderful program, but I have a couple of questions there. Because the solar is being generated during peak hours, the most of the consumption occurs maybe for the residential at off-peak hours. Is there a price differential? Who is going to benefit from that price differential? There are several players in that, like consumers, the developers, the host site owner. Who is actually benefiting from this community program? All of them, or only, is there any bias in that one?
So I think that subscribers are going to have different prices based on what that developer is offering them, and we are currently in the process of reviewing all of those applications. And I will say for folks that have said that, lots of people don't know about community solar, or we need to get further down. I would say that the stacks of boxes in our office of applications would say that lots of people do know about it. But the next piece of that is going to be letting subscribers actually know. And that's going to be where that community-based outreach comes in. I think that we're not going to know the answer to some of those questions until we review them and we look at what's next. And that's why this is the first year of a pilot program.
Thank you. There was a question at the back.
Is it on? I was just wondering, what was the average savings to consumers in Indiana?
I think the first utility was $4 billion over a 10-year period to ratepayers. The second utility, they haven't resolved it yet. It's still pending how they're going to replace the coal plants with a mix. But we're talking about many billions of dollars. An interesting thing that happened, so there's going to be a backlash, right? So the backlash took the form of new legislation that was proposed in the spring. A lot of the coal interests were behind this, to prohibit the PUC from approving a change in the resource mix for a utility that saved money. So they had to go that far to say, no, we can't allow utilities to just change the resource mix in order to save money. So we're going to prevent them from doing that. So that bill was talked about all spring. They brought in Scott Pruitt to lobby for it as an outside lobbyist, and it didn't pass. In a Republican state with a Republican governor and legislature, even that couldn't get enough votes. Like, who's going to stand up and vote that we are going to prohibit you from saving money on your electric bill? Anyway, so.
My question was more to the average consumer. What did they see as a reduction on their bill?
I just know the big number, which is, I don't remember the detail of how much. It's substantial.
It was $4 billion over 4 years, right? 30 years. $4 billion over.
I don't think it was 30 years, but anyway, I don't know. Yeah.
Any more questions from the audience? Otherwise, I have a question again to the state that you have target for clean energy products, and what about, can something be thought about in terms of energy equity targets as well? Means in future when you are looking at that in terms of 30 years down the line or others, can you also talk about equity targets that set up a target and okay, we'll reach out to this many LMI communities that are not being thought about in your draft master plan to when you are finalizing the master plan, can you put some details and targets in that chapter in?
Well, I think the answer of can we put things in, it's a draft. And we're having those conversations now. I think that the goal has always been, and that's why it is its own strategy as well, is that the goal is always to make sure that we are surveying all of our ratepayers, but we are paying particular attention to making sure that those environmental justice communities are able to utilize all of these programs and are able to benefit from the renewable energy pieces, as well as sort of the health benefits that go around along with all of those things. I think that building out 30-year targets when really the whole priority is making sure that they're addressed, I'm not sure that those two things work. 30 years out, I don't know how much of that mix has to be LMI or if we will have gotten to a better place, but I think that it's going to be a continual conversation.
And a question to you, Eric. When we teach in classes, a lot of our students want to be like you. But when they go into the job, they become like us, a lot of the people in here, like that part slightly dries away. Means how will you, if you advise me in my class, if I go back after the summit, oh, we had a wonderful summit and the climate week is going on, and if you want to pursue a career in that field, means rather than go into, and which is not like taking sides, means like becoming a university professor or a researcher or agencies or PSCNG or corporates, means how can that activist spark remain in the students for much longer when they go in?
I think the students have demonstrated a tremendous amount of leadership, and I think that they are farther ahead where they are right now in school than I was when I was their age, in terms of thinking, and that we need a political and systemic change, the status quo, and that their future depends on it. I think the students today, they already see and feel that. Sometimes I'm critical of the researchers and scientists, because, well, we presented the information, it's up to you to decide. So, and that's just the nature of the job and business. But, we could use more advocates, from the scientists, too, to come down and help us push for these stronger policies. So, I think the students, they see that their time is on, their life is on the line here. And I'm critical sometimes, I say, we're looking at these 100% by 2050 goals. But the recent report that came out says we need, swift action by 2030. So this is the time, this is the place. We need to do more now, sooner rather than later. So I think the students are doing great.
Yeah. And this comes up because one of the questions that I got from one of my students, this is about courage, this is not about economics. I teach economics and policy, and they talk about, no, some of the people, they lack courage, that's why these decisions are not being taken, which was, it hurt me, it means it inside that. Yes, it might be a matter of courage, and you deal with those policies day in and day out. And we do in terms of numbers, dollars, and others, means when we do research. So that way, thank you for doing that work around, because we need people, all of us, like we are here, but for our students, you guys are guiding force. They want to be like you when we talk to them, but let's talk about that later. What do they become 10 years down the line?
I have a comment on that. So we obviously need activists, people, as we're seeing, millions of people now being very vocal about we have to do something. But I think your students, what we need them is this special spot that's the connection between advocacy and the policy work. Many of the people in the room, I recognize quite a few, are in the weeds doing policy work. And that's where, whether we make it or not, it's going to depend on what we do in the implementation process, in BPU proceedings, DEP proceedings. It's not the sexy, having banners and saying we have to solve climate change. It's the gritty, are we doing smart policies? Are they actually have a chance of working? That's where we need your students. So, we can all, be very vocal about what we're trying to achieve, but we really need help in the room when we're really crafting policy. This is going to get hard. Kind of getting to 2-3% renewables was easier. We could just say we want renewables. That when we get to 20% to 50% to 80%, we have a whole new set of challenges. It's complicated, and we need smart people behind the scenes, in the room, in stakeholder processes, who can be very thoughtful and well-informed, and I'm sure your students can do a lot to help us.
Yeah, sure. That's why we want, but we also want some students to be going on Eric's side as well. So, are there any last comments, questions? Oh.
Thanks. In the spirit of the gritty analysis that Barb was mentioning, we've heard a lot about the planning for the future of the electric system to accommodate all these renewables and be able to get up to those high percentages. We've also heard a little bit about stranded assets, and we've heard about decarbonizing or decarbonizing heat and decarbonizing electric generation at the same time. There's a lot of implications for the future of the gas system. Gas infrastructure has a high risk of being a stranded cost for a lot of whoever the remaining gas customers are, not that many years out. How are you thinking about planning for that gas future in terms of planning the gas system itself, not just planning what happens to the buildings and the generators?
How are we planning for the gas system? So, there's different kinds of investments. Some of it really is private sector investment, and a lot of what we're talking about is private investment in generation assets and even interstate pipelines that ratepayers are not on the hook for. So that's sort of, there's one category of things that our investors are on the hook for, and that's why I think it's important, this sending the price signals now that there's going to be a different way forward, not only in New Jersey, but throughout the Mid-Atlantic, Northeast, is important. For local gas distribution, that's what we're talking about. So we have local regulated utilities, and we are there are investors who are also at risk. But yes, ratepayers are going to have to pay for maintaining a gas distribution system as the volume goes down and down and down and down. So so people recognize that this is a coming big issue. In California, there's now a policy paper, I think EDF wrote it, about what is that going to look like. So they're beginning to have that conversation in California. The fact that if you just let every part of the system gradually wind down, you have to pay the remaining users on the system, their rates are going to go through the roof. And those will often be low and moderate income folks who end up paying when other people migrate away from it, electrify, and don't use gas. So there has to be a very thoughtful approach to cutting off regions, areas, and just shutting down the gas system. So anyway, these are the policy issues they're talking about. How are we going to gracefully manage the exit so that it isn't just ratepayers being on the hook, it's actually the low and moderate income communities that are at risk there. So big topic to be discussed.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. So thank you. Join me in thanking all the wonderful panelists along with me here. So Kathleen, Bob, Anthony, and Eric. So thank you all. And thank you all for being with us for the day's journey. You invested quite a bit, means again an economist and we're talking. So we have now come to the close of our summit. And going forward, I believe that we can tap into the enormous potential found in what we learned, discussed today. The presentations at the summit highlighted our shared objective for meeting New Jersey's clean energy plans, commitment to a rigorous data-driven and modeling and analysis to benefit every member of the NJ city. And we think that all of us work together, then we can move ahead on that direction. So that's why the different sessions talks about, but I find a common theme that the goal is for all of us together, is if you like it or not, the change is going to happen. That's what the New Jersey is facing, that one. So might be clean energy is the change that we all are looking for, clean and sustainable energy. Be part of that, otherwise we'll be left on the bus. That's what one of the messages I got. But how to do it well, that's what a lot of information came in. Different speakers talked about their goals, how can they address the shared challenges as well as our priorities. After the summit, going through the full day, I feel like we are all committed to identifying and exploring opportunities such as vibrant offshore wind market, New Jersey, resulting broader economic impact of the clean energy markets, planning for the various ways in which public and private sectors can work together to maximize their respective and shared objectives, so they can work together rather than being in conflict with each other. That's what I found today. Then the information generated today will also prove helpful to researchers and institutions. Coming from the university side, we learned quite a bit from these ones. It's not that we feel, oh, we are in a university. We lack a lot of knowledge. Evidence guides policies, and evidence-based policy goes into our classes, in our instructions as well. So we learn, we digest it in, and we try to improve ourselves. So we are a lifelong learner that way. So thank you for helping us out on that front. I'm certain that the New Jersey's membership in the larger regional market will be critical in creating modernized energy infrastructure pathways, and that will lead to outcomes that are not only reliable but also sustainable. So our PGM and others, its reliability is a major part, not just clean and sustainable, but we also have to think about reliability at times. So how can it be reliable? Then we also had exciting ideas, an ongoing effort to make clean energy affordable and accessible. And at times, it was like the people whom you don't think that they will work together, they sat together, worked together, and sometimes our job is to ask questions or being devil's advocate and poke something to get something out of that. We tried to do that in all the forums, so thank you for going with us on this journey. And as I said this morning, our aim was to bring together the different actors involved in helping New Jersey's ambitious energy goals. And I personally feel we have made some steps towards that today. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the various departments and individuals who made this summit a success. So our Dean, Laura Billings, is here. Thank you. So it's a college initiative that she started last year for this summit. So thank you, Laura, for being with us again. Then I thank President Cole, Dean Billings, as well as Commissioner Chiokula, Commissioner Gordon, and others for inspiring us. We need those inspirations at times to work harder and move faster. I also want to thank all the moderators and presenters whose research, discussions, and their ideas made the summit lively and engaging. Thank you, all the audience members, for asking questions, so it was a two-way conversation rather than one-way. Like, we as professors think about lecturing and talking to students, but we like when we are being talked to. That is what we aspire for, if you ask me. Like, what I want to be, like a lifelong learner, so that aspiration is always there. And last but not the least, I'd like to acknowledge the CESAC team, which helped pull us off. So Megan Smith, Taylor Wojrak, they were the central people who helped us out. They are the researchers in our, as well as every member of the staff. If you see people wearing CESAC t-shirts, it's not me. I get the credit, or it's not even Dean, but it's them, like the students, the researchers, the staff, and others who worked very hard to pull this off. And we are improving. This was the second summit. So we'll do it every year. So next year we are hoping you will come, and we want to do that reaffirm CESAC's commitment as the center to furthering this discussion. We think that we contribute to this, and that's why we see a lot of repeating faces who came back again, or the new ones. We hope you will come back again and bring your colleagues and friends around so that the discussion can move forward. Throughout the day, we have been posting updates about the summit on our social media accounts. If you don't, go through that. There are social media accounts on Facebook, LinkedIn, and others. Help get us the word out about CESAC, get us the word about the summit, and also all about you, that what you are doing. In the following days, we'll upload the videos from the summit so that others can benefit. So it will be uploaded. And to the speakers and others, if you have sensitive data involved, please let us know. If you don't want it to be on the web, otherwise we think that it was a public offering, and when the press and others were also involved. And please invite your colleagues to watch the videos and how you contributed to it. Not just at times, the personal part also plays a role, that I was there and I did this, so I'll encourage you to do that. And we hope that you all stay in touch and you will come back for the next year again at the summit. And thank you. Thank you again for staying so long, and thank you for contributing to this and making this what we are. So thank you all.